Good evening, everyone. It's 6:01. We're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Stridiron. Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton? Here. Ms. Green? Here. Dr. Henderson?
Here.
Mr. Howard? Mr. Levenstein? Here. Ms. Maida? Here. Ms. Mineo?
Here.
Mr. Stridiron? Here. Mr. Walker?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose: matter made confidential under FERPA, employment history of particular individuals, matters leading to the employment of particular individuals, the review of programs and placements of students with disabilities, collective bargaining under the Taylor Law, NTA NASA, discussion regarding current litigation LB versus NECSD, and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Levenstein? Yes. Ms. Maida?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
I'm hoping this is going to be a short one. We're back. It must be a record. So we're now at the section of the agenda for public discussion and comments on agenda items. Please refer to the regulations regarding discussion and comments. Mr. McCoy?
No one signed up, ma'am.
Okay. So we're going to move on to our interim superintendent, Mr. Forget.
Thank you, Madam President. This evening, we would like to present to you the remaining portions of our budget, starting with curriculum. And so if everyone could go to the budget and function code 2010. Madam President, we would like to follow the same process we used last week, where you guide us through each of the function codes. We normally focus on plus or minus 10%, and we hope to get through the budget.
Great. So we're going to start with Code 2010, Curriculum Development and Supervision. Are there any questions? Mr. Stridiron?
Thank you, Madam President. So this function includes just administration, or it includes others in it? Can you please just give us a rundown of who's included?
Sure. Ms. Soto and Ms. Moriarty are prepared to engage in this conversation. Ms. Moriarty?
Thank you. This line includes salaries for 3 assistant superintendents, all directors and supervisors, and support staff.
Thank you. So prior to 2014, the system, the structure was assistant superintendent for elementary and then secondary. We didn't have directors, I believe, at every level like we have now. It was a very small group of, I guess it would be superintendents or assistant superintendents. We had Dr. Shanahan and I can't remember the other name. Mr. Vasquez. Below them, did we have directors besides CTE and athletics? Like what? I'm sorry?
We had fine and performing arts.
We had music, but
We had fine and performing arts, we had athletics, and we had CTE. They were executive directors at that time. It was executive director Dr. Shanahan, executive director Mr. Vasquez. One was elementary, one was secondary. We then went to
So with that structure, we had the assistant superintendents and some of the directors working with the lead teachers in each school to implement curriculum. Is that correct?
No, they weren't assistant superintendents. They were executive directors.
Executive directors.
Right.
They were working with the lead teachers in each school to implement curriculum?
There was a very similar model to now where the directors work with the lead teachers. The executive directors also work with the lead teachers. Lead teachers are only at the secondary level.
What I'm getting at is we have such a big structure now, but over the last 8 years, we really haven't seen the impact that you would think such a structure would create. Why do you think that is? Like, what is it? Poor choice of programs? What is it? Because the way I feel right now is I think we should go and use the funding for some of these positions and put it in the classroom. I would like to see teaching assistants from K all the way through 3, because third grade is the first year they take the statewide exams, at least the way it's structured now. I would like to see teaching assistants in every single classroom, K through 3. I know your budget does have some more teaching assistants in it, I believe 19. How many would we need to hire, not included in this budget, to cover every class K through T with a teaching assistant?
That was a very complex question you just asked. A lot of different layers in it. So if I go back to the first thing that I heard you ask, what are my thoughts on this model versus a previous model? I think there are too many variables to be able to figure that out, Mr. Strader, and for me to give you a straight answer. We truly haven't had state assessment data for the past couple of years where all of the students were taking the tests. I think that each year the State Education Department changes the format for the New York State assessments, both math and English language arts. So for me to use that statistically to assess growth within the district is very difficult. Do I think that the model that we have for instructional support right now is a model that our district needs? Absolutely. I think to have a district of a director of English language arts, math, science, and social studies pre-K through 12 is definitely needed. We have changing standards with the State Education Department constantly. These directors are making sure that the curriculums are developed, that the curriculums are aligned to the standards. They're taking a look at working with teachers to create common assessments. Are we where we need to be? No, we're not where we need to be, but I think having the curriculum supports to be able to really do that work in collaboration with the teachers is truly important. Your question with regards to teaching assistants, it's kind of definitely a need, obviously, increasing the teaching and the instructional supports within a classroom. Who would argue that? But we also have to understand that the current employment status that we're in right now, we're unable to secure teaching assistants. We're struggling right now to recruit teaching assistants. So your question, how many would it take? At the kindergarten level, on an average, our classes go about 37, 38 deep across the district for K-1-2. So I would assume, using a ballpark figure, I've got 38 Ks right now. I would need 38, I would need 76 for first and second grade. I can't fill 5 vacancies right now in the district with teaching assistants where I need them for special education, and we're working as hard as we possibly can to fill those gaps. We have some certain subs in there, we've got coverage, but it's really difficult. I think when you define what's the instructional support program that we're looking for the district, all of those variables have to be taken into consideration. It's not just saying we need more teaching assistants. It's really taking a look at the number of academic intervention services teachers that we have, the number of teaching assistants we have, the classroom teachers that we have, the supports from teachers on special assignment, the instructional coaches. It's a system of support. It's not just a one kind of method of that.
Are you done with your question? Can I go? Mrs. Burton had her light on.
Thank you, Madam President. So then my question is, and I got to formulate it in my head, if the system is, if the organizational system is designed, then has the district kept up in terms of the roles and responsibilities of each one so that at the end of the day, we can answer the question that Mr. Stridiron asked, which is, you know, are we progressing? How are we doing? And so that's my question. I mean,
Yeah.
has there been a deeper dive into roles and responsibilities? Have they been, you know, changed in terms of the trajectory from then to now? Because, you know, I can understand somebody coming in 20 years ago having an expectation of what their job responsibilities are, only for initiatives to come in, right? And you know, things change, and I know we have PD, but have we looked at job descriptions to clarify that folk clearly understand what their roles and responsibilities are in comparison to what they were?
We're taking a close look at that now. And it's not just in administration, it's also in the instructional support personnel in the schools, the teachers on special assignment, the instructional coaches. We at one time had an instructional coach model where we had an instructional coach in every building at the elementary level when we were implementing the Common Core. But your specific question is, are we looking at the way the roles and responsibilities of our current administrative staff to see whether it's aligned with the direction that we're trying to go in the future? I think we're doing that right now. That's not an easy thing to do. I think the exit outcomes for students are very different than they were 5-10 years ago. These students need to know much more technical information, and they must have more technical knowledge. And on top of that, we now have a pandemic where students for 2 years really didn't get the dedicated classroom instruction that we had hoped that they would. They were not 100% in person the whole time. A lot of these students were learning virtually. A virtual model is very difficult to implement when you have to do that on the dime. So we as a senior staff right now are taking a look at each of the different administrative positions, and we're beginning to think about what is the work that they are currently doing and what is the work that they should be doing. And we're doing that as a collective team. It's a very in-depth process that we're engaging in right now so that we are prepared for this summer and the next year.
Mr. Levinstein?
Thank you, Madam President. So I have this question, and I don't know if it's something you may not want to answer, but has the school board, has this board created obstacles for the district to go forward? And I mean, I'm asking that if there's ways that we can help, you know, not just pulling our ideas out of the air, where we can be a partner in going forward. So are we part of the reason at times that there are obstacles?
I guess I would ask you the same question. So as you reflect on your role as a Board of Education member, do you feel that you're adding value to the education of the students in the district?
Do I feel individually? I don't know. I think we need to be a collective unit to try to be part of what is good going forward. I hope we're not obstacles, and I hope that if central office sees an obstacle within our ranks, that they let us know so we can work better together going forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Stridiron, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. So basically, talking about what Mr. Levinstein and Mr. Forger were talking about, I see my role as trying to get the best outcomes for the students. So when I look at a budget, if I see resources, in my opinion, that doesn't go towards the education of the students for not just the short term, but the long term, I think it needs to be changed. I'd rather put resources where I think they'd be more efficient, more efficiently used. So I'd rather see it in the classroom. So I understand teaching assistants may be very difficult to find, but if you do something bold and you say we're going to hire how many, 100, say 100 teaching assistants, and you put that out, and you put it nationwide, hey, you get the person, contacting the media, we're going to hire 100 teaching assistants. We're going to focus on cutting the size, the student-teacher ratio in half in K through 3. You're going to attract attention, and you may find people that were willing to come here and to do something different. It's never been done before. I don't think we've ever had K through 3, a teaching assistant every single classroom. I'd rather see money spent towards that than some of these positions that I feel we didn't have them in the past, and not that it was a great outcome, but it's pretty similar to what we have now. So the last 8 years, to me, we need to change. We need to do something different, and the biggest impact you can have is in the classroom itself. So I would like to see some of these positions cut from this budget, up to $850,000 in directors, and put towards teaching assistants. I don't know how many you could get for that, but it's closer to the goal of having one in every classroom K through 3.
So thank you for your consideration and your recommendation. I think that, when we look at what you're saying, that's one request for one particular instructional support in the schools in the classroom. What I heard from Ms. Burton was, when you look at your system of support, when you look at all of the component pieces that make up what we're trying to do to improve outcomes for kids, how does each one of those add value to the life of a student? So I need to, as I look at the big picture, be careful that I don't just go so narrow and such a thin slice that I could possibly pull us back even further. I don't think it's an easy question to say, or a response to you to say, add 38, add 76 teaching assistants, and we're on track. Because if I do that, what is the level of support and what is the level of professional development? What's the level of capacity building that will now go away when I don't have a director of math as we're trying to implement a new math curriculum? I don't have a director of ELA when I'm trying to implement a K-12 literacy program. You see, one of the hard parts that I had when I went into administration was I was becoming too far removed from the kids in the classroom. But I learned very quickly that if I could touch and I could build the capacity of 5 adults, those 5 adults have an opportunity to hit 30 kids each. I have 150 kids just as a result of my actions now. So I don't think it's a straight one-on-one answer to say to you, I need to increase teaching assistants and things are going to be okay. I think that's something we have to say. If we do that, what do we lose? And what's the loss as a result of that, and how will that impact kids? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But if we would have implemented something like this 8 years ago, those students would be in 11th grade right now. They would be better at reading and math and social studies and science than they are right now. So I'm seeing it as a long-term. Every year we say these test scores are bad. What can we do? Well, we could have done something different in K through 3 that would have affected kids for their entire life. So I understand the supports. We didn't have these directors before. We did. No,
We did.
Not all of them.
We did. I was a director, and I'm going to speak for the directors. What the directors do is what Mr. Forget just said. They impact teachers who impact directly kids. And it's important because they know the specifics in their subject area and are able to communicate that and work with the staff on instruction and curriculum, which is really important to have the day-to-day go smoothly and the kids to achieve what they're doing. Before, we even had more directors. Then we went to less, and now we're back to basically what we had. But I think that each one of them fills a role that's unique. I'll tell you, the director of foreign language and bilingual, they call something else at this point, is the specialist in that area and can carry through the knowledge and understanding of Part 154, of Title III, and all those things that are very specific for that area of knowledge, just like Mr. Eitri, very specific knowledge. So for English language arts, she does the same thing. And I think it's very important to have that person who is going to keep looking at the delivery of instruction and the moving forward of curriculum in the school buildings to work with it. Without those, there's a gap between central office and what's going on between the principals and the kids. There is a gap, and that gap would be where the curriculum and instruction gets going. Because many times, although principals are supposed to be instructional leaders, what happens is we become managers, or they become managers, because of the day-to-day what's going on in the schools. No fault of anybody, but it's very hard for them to improve instruction and keep up with the day-to-day and what's going on in social studies, which is changing, in mathematics, which is changing, in ESL and bilingual, which is totally changing all the time. They can't be a master of everything. That's why the directors are siloed to give that information directly to groups of teachers who then impart it to the groups of children.
Do other districts of our size, or even a little smaller, have this structure?
I'm not sure if it's this exact structure, but they have a similar structure. I believe the last time I looked, which was probably a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, Schenectady had a similar structure. They may have referred to them as supervisors or coordinators, but they had a similar structure to this particular model we have.
I just don't understand why we can't have more TAs in the classroom. Where else can we get in the budget? I mean, I know we didn't have, I know it's a different, it was curriculum, we're on curriculum. So there's another director that we didn't have before that we have now. When that time comes, I'll bring that up for discussion. But I don't understand why we can't have more help in the classroom. Why is it so important to have such a heavy administration that, from what I'm hearing, is really not connected to the classroom? It is not functioning the way it could be.
I think everybody's understanding what you're saying, and so now we're going to move, because Mrs. Maida and Mr. Howard do have questions. Go ahead, Mrs. Maida.
I just had a question. Having been in that situation, there are a lot of supports that are very essential for a classroom teacher that aren't necessarily in the classroom all day. Now, if I'm correct, I don't know, perhaps I'm not correct, the kindergarten teachers all have aides now. Is that correct, Mr. Forget, pretty much?
Teaching assistants.
Oh, teaching assistants. I'm sorry, I meant that. So I think first grade and second grade has a great deal of support. Now, I understand where you're coming from, but I also think that sometimes that teacher assistant who may go between other classrooms could be more effective by working with smaller groups of children rather than being in a classroom all day. So she could have a role like that, which I have found very effective from, listening to other teachers. It's just my opinion, but I understand. I really agree with Mr. Forget saying that it's much more layered than I think everyone understands.
Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a very difficult conversation, and the reason I say that is, so Mr. Strittine has a question, and his question sounds, something that's needed, but at the same time, when you talk about eliminating one thing and adding another, I think we need to do more explanation, because it's not just us who we're talking to here. We're talking to a public that hears that, oh, well, all they have to do is put more TAs in there, and that changes, it's going to help with the scores. And let's not tie it back to 8 years ago, because I'm born and raised in this community, went to school here, and historically, the scores that we're talking to and we're referring to didn't go low 8 years ago. It's been low for quite some time. So I think we need to try to focus on how to impact those scores. What do we need to do to impact that marginalized population where those low scores are coming from? And I think that as a body, it's dangerous to put conversation out there without explaining what we're talking about. Explain what a TA does. Explain what directors do. Explain the job of executive directors. Because one person is saying we should eliminate those, but other people don't think we should eliminate those positions. Let's talk about what those positions add to our district, and then let's talk about how to impact those scores that Mr. Stridine is talking about with the money.
Mr. Forget.
Now, I just wanted to make one final comment with regards to the teaching assistants. We do value teaching assistants in this district. They are critical at different periods of time throughout a classroom, 7-hour instructional day. But because of the fact that we're in the situation that we're in right now where we're struggling to recruit, I do want you to know that Mrs. Van and Mr. McLemore are currently working to create a leadership pipeline, and they are working with Mount St. Mary College to begin to help individuals within the community or within the district who aspire to become a teaching assistant to get into that role, to receive that certification, and to be successful in that classroom. So we're not just saying we have a shortage right now. We're saying we've got to tap into the resources that are in the community and help them get there. And Mrs. Van and Mr. McLemore are already on that. And again, I think you have to think of a complex system and the system of education that we have, and not just think of just one little slice of that system. It's the way they all interconnect, and that's the work that we're trying to do this year so that we're better prepared for next year. We're not perfect, but we're trying.
Mrs. Maida?
I just had a quick question. Is it a long process for the teaching assistant certification? Or can it be, does New York State make it a long process?
Mrs. Van or Mr. McLemore?
It's not as long as a teacher, but it's a layered process.
Okay. So then, that's another piece of it. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Howard.
So, dovetailing on what Ms. Maida just said, and I know when I was on the diversity committee, I know that Ms. Burton had this conversation recently. We're talking about building our own, and from inside, and seeing from teacher assistants to TAs to teachers aides become teacher assistants who can become teachers, and we're talking about building from within. Those are conversations that we should be having.
And Mr. Stridine, I want you to know that I think everybody around the table really believes that K2 is the place. That's where everything begins.
We've been talking about this since 2014, though.
We've been talking about it since
I
long
know
as
that, but specifically when you came on the board, you specifically said these kids have to read.
Yes.
And there were initiatives started, and all of a sudden they just went away. And it just never, ever seems to, we never seem to finish anything. I just want to see something finished for a change. And if you say that we need all these people to finish, then that's great, but we need help in the classroom. I just don't, I understand, Mr. Howard, yes, we definitely need a pipeline. We've been talking about pipeline for a long time.
We've been talking about pipelines since 1980.
So I just don't understand why it's every year the same conversation. And now we have money. There's money in the budget. There's extra money from the federal government. That money's going to go away. We have to do something right now so that when the money goes away, that the in the classroom doesn't suffer. So I really feel as if, yes, this budget is complete because you have added factors to the classroom, added factors to social and emotional, but what's the plan 5 years from now with these positions? What are the kids in kindergarten right now going to, first grade right now going to do when they have 25 kids in a class, one teacher, and then you have someone coming in for help, but you're not getting the help that they really need. I just want to give the kids what they need. That's it.
I don't think anybody disputes that. I think that we're all feeling the same way, and we're all committed to that. I think I'm hearing your recommendation, and I'm hearing what you're saying, and it's not that I'm disagreeing with you. It's just that it's not a simple yes or no, because there are other factors that impact the lives of a child, such as a social worker, such as a guidance counselor, such as an additional AP teacher. All of those things have impact, Mr. Stridarn. And I think that we're trying very hard to put together a system that's going to work. When you mention the stimulus money, yeah, that money's going away. So how do we build capacity that can sustain the improvement efforts that we have in place? So it's not just adding additional personnel, it's taking the personnel that we currently have to give them new resources and new ways of approaching, so that when the money goes away, and possibly some teachers go away, they have new techniques and new skills to be able to continue with the needs that our students are telling us. So it's capacity building as well through professional development. It's addressing pandemic-related issues in extended day and extended year programs. So it's providing opportunities for students to come and learn in time. So time after school for teachers to teach students, time during the summer to teach students. It's not just adding additional personnel. It's closing those gaps that these kids have as a result of the pandemic, as well as building their skills moving forward. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but it can't just be add additional staffing, add additional staffing. We won't be able to sustain that beyond the stimulus money. It's got to be a balance of professional development, capacity building, and supports at the end of the day and during the summer.
Mr. Howard, you had your hand up?
Or sometime in the very near future, can we use this as a launch pad for the conversation of the K-2? Because like you said, everyone around this table understands where the problem is starting at. It's starting early. And when kids don't learn to read, they have problems navigating through the educational system. So if we really drill down and really talk about that K-2 school we've been talking about, that gives us the ammunition to fight that conversation. But everybody has to be all hands on board with that. And we have to understand what that takes, what it means, and who it's going to impact, and who is going to have the positive outcomes from that K-2 school that we've been talking about for the last few years. I think that conversation is a conversation that should be had.
Ms. Burton?
Yes, so I agree, K-2, but then we have a community that kids are coming that aren't ready for K. And so I've said this before, when do we look at the other systems that aren't necessarily to the best of their ability, maybe, that we are getting kids from a particular community. The disparities are coming in at K. And so that's a whole group that's already behind. And so are we looking at, where they're coming from, whether it is daycare, whether they're, being kept by grandma. I have my grandson in the morning to put him on the bus. But that hour and a half with him are teaching lessons, right? To prepare him for when he comes to kindergarten every day. And so do we know that? Do we know the daycares? Are the daycares on board in terms of ensuring our kids? Do we know? And I think we should know. I think it should be part of our K packet, and maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know, because I don't know what the packet is. That's saying, what did they get from out the womb until 5 years old? Because that right there tells us who to begin with. Because if they're kids that don't need it, but we need to focus on the ones that do, coming in the building pre-K and K in our buildings.
Anything? Go ahead. Can we continue? Any more questions on that item? Yes, Mr. Stradine.
Does the Director of Communications position fall under 2010?
Yes, Mr. Strahan.
Okay, so there's a position that we didn't have before, that we didn't, it's not needed. We need reach out to the community, but we don't need a Director of Communications. So I'm asking that the board consider removing this position and putting it towards the classroom.
So can I poll the board on that? Okay. Ms. Green? Recommendation on the floor is that we remove a position, and that's the Director of Communication.
Yes.
Or do you want to have conversation first? We can have conversation first, so hang on a second. Anybody else want to speak about that? Go ahead.
So to arbitrarily cut off a position like that, I think is not prudent as a board. First of all, I understand what Mr. Strahan is saying, but at the same time, in 2022, you have to have a Director of Communications. Are you kidding me? You're going to cut a Director of Communications in a time when information is power right now. So that's the first position we go after because it wasn't there before. I don't agree with that. I think to do it in 2022, we're really putting ourselves back at the end of the line again. We need to be where other districts are. Show me a district without a communication director or a business without a communication director. I don't agree with that move.
Ms. Peterson?
I just also want the board to be aware that it is important, and it's come across through many of our surveys. Panorama, our insight survey for parents and for students, that the way that we communicate with our parents and our family and community engagement is something that the district has been, it's a part of our strategic plan, it's a part of what our yearly goals are. As we know, in this day and age, many people communicate in various platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's about getting our events out. And our communications director is an integral part of supporting our families, not only our English families, but our Spanish-speaking families, and getting the information out. So it's an essential part of our operations as a district to make sure that we're communicating with the community.
Mr. Forget, then I'll get to Ms. Green and Mr. Levinstein.
Madam President, it is not the recommendation of the superintendent to eliminate that position. I agree with some of what I'm hearing. That Director of Communication is a needed position in this district. We have been under consideration for not being transparent. I believe this Director of Communication is a vital role to begin to communicate the real things that are happening in this district. Not many people outside of Newburgh understand what we are really doing in this district and the amount of people that are dedicating their time and energy to that. And the Director of Communications doesn't just work with the press. They work with our schools. They work with our teachers. They work with our administrators. They create events. They do public relations. And all of those things play into the culture that we're trying to cultivate in this district. You take a Director of Communications and you think about how are we going to get positive press? How are people going to want to move into the Newburgh community? How are we going to get real estate agents to turn to specific articles of evidence? That's the Director of Communication for the district. That's the way we grow a community, by teachers teaching in the classroom and coordinating and working with the administrators and the families learning the good things that are happening. We can't put other managerial types of things on our principals' backs. They're working as hard as they possibly can. The Director of Communication is truly a needed position in this district and has been for quite some time. And I believe the Director of Communication, along with the coordinator that works alongside, they're doing an amazing job, and I can't be more proud of the work that they do.
Ms. Green?
I'm just trying to figure out exactly what is the job title, what is the job description of Director of Communication, number one, because I haven't seen it that much. Number two, why does it have to be a director of communication? I'm not saying shouldn't have someone to communicate, but once you put the title director in front of it, it's dollar signs. So I'm asking, does it have to be a director of communication? You need communication. I'm not arguing with that. But once you put the title director in front, that's more money. So I kind of agree, Mr. Stradine, in terms of why does it have to be a director of communication? Yes, we need a communication person, but why does it have to be a director? Because that's more money.
I think that we can look at it as more money, or we can think of it as someone who is more skilled, more trained, and more prepared to handle a variety of different things that are presented. I think it's also the time and the energy in a 12-month position of a director is really benefiting us. The directors are available to us basically 24/7. 4 o'clock in the morning when I call one of my communications individuals, they're up. They're waiting for a call. They're ready to execute it. And again, it's not just the initial communication out. It's thinking about the implications for communication that go beyond just a snow day. And how do I get all that information out? And how do I make sure that the athletics are being covered? And how do I make sure that the buildings are being covered? It is a widespread support system that we have in value from that director. I can't speak any higher about it.
Okay, Mr. Levinstein?
So everyone around this table knows why you don't want that position there, Mrs. Jardine. Everybody here does. And I can, if you want, and I don't know if it goes to personnel, explain some things why I feel that way.
I'm not sure that this is the place
Okay,
and the
thank you.
time. And because we're talking about an individual, and that's human resources, and that we'd have to do an executive session. So, hold on. Yes, Mr. Baer.
So, I will argue that in my 33 years in administration, having to navigate COVID and being the guy that had to manage COVID for the past year was the single greatest challenge I've ever experienced. It was insurmountable at times. If I didn't have that director of communications, she was my lifeline. There were so many aspects of the pandemic I had to unpack. All the guidance coming down, how it was to be translated into performing arts, into interscholastic sports, how are we going to deal with events, looking at the trends across the community, getting information back to us about how this is handled in other districts. It was so insurmountable. We literally, there was a group of us that had more than daily conversations, sometimes hours, trying to unpack how we as a district are going to respond to something that's never occurred before. If that communications director was not in that position, I'm telling you right now, I would not have been successful. It was the single greatest linchpin. The entire communications team really was my lifeline to really understand how we're going to handle this and make sure that we don't confuse people, that we don't throw contradictions out to say one thing on a Monday and change it on a Wednesday, when that was occurring beyond us, when the governor and the CDC and the Department of Health were doing that to us almost on a daily basis. So to make coherence out of this madness that we had to endure for the past year, without a communications director and a communications team, I'm telling you right now, I don't even know if I'd be here today. So I need you to understand that from my point of view. And I know that's one example of many, but it's not something just anybody could have done. You needed somebody who had the technical understanding, the administrative know-how, the judgment, the perspective that I would argue administrators bring to these equations that oftentimes other people don't necessarily have the training, the practice, or the experience to do. So that's my 2 cents, and I cannot imagine this district without that.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Dr. Henderson, then Ms. Burton, then Ms. Maida, and then Mr. Howard. So we'll go in that order. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. I guess my question to Mr. Forget is really a broader question, not in particular to just this topic, but when you look at a budget, it's a justification of how the money is spent. And I think what everybody can agree on is that we need to see more qualitative and quantitative data that supports the decisions that you're making with the finances. Are these decisions resulting in improved test scores? Are these decisions resulting in students who achieve better academically, personally, socially, the whole 9 yards? And so I don't think it's too much to ask for a justification for all of these categories, because that's 6 figures worth of increases. And do we have any data that proves that those increases are going to result directly, not a correlation, but causation, in improved student performance? And that's really the data that we need to see every single year, not just every now and then, not just when it hits somebody at the right moment. Every single year there needs to be a look back, right? Teacher to student ratio, aide assistant to student ratio, all those factors, right? Administrator to student ratio. How are we performing versus bigger school districts, apple to apple comparison? So I'd just like a little bit of clarification on that.
Sure. And I think we have been presenting data throughout this year. I think that when you take a look at data that talks about the lives and progress of a child, it's not just academic achievement data. You're also taking a look at demographic data and comparison and trying to triangulate that data. So we've presented to you, I believe, iReady data for English language arts and math. And we are seeing some growth in our students, not only from year to year, but beginning of year to middle of year to end of year, with regards to iReady, math and English language arts, and we will continue to put that in the weekly so that you can take a look at that. I think the pandemic has provided us with a lot of data with the Panorama survey, so we specifically know the SEL needs of our students, which we were not able to do probably 3 years ago. Under the Director of Pupil Personnel Services, that director has implemented this Panorama survey, and that data that came back, he worked with the directors from Curriculum and Instruction and Exceptional Learners to decompress that data to figure out what are the targeted needs of the students. And I'm going to turn to either Mr. Baer or Ms. Peterson to talk a little bit about what are the specific needs of the students that we're trying to address around SEL at the elementary and the secondary level.
So you're asking me to talk about what are the specific areas? So
what did we learn from the Panorama
So
survey?
we learned that self-regulation at the elementary level is a critical need. Students self-identified self-regulation as a skill they do not inhabit and embody in in school. At the secondary level, it was a sense of belonging, identity, and these are we're unpacking that and translating that into action through our Tier 1 supports around social emotional learning, as well as creating a system of support to make sure that we include behavior and social emotional well-being in our package of interventions. And we're no longer separating academics from behavior. They both go hand in glove. And that work is being done by our administration.
Mrs. Moriarty, can you tell us a little bit about the academic needs based on the iReady data for ELA and math, 3-8 or K-8?
K-8, sure. So we continue to see vocabulary, comprehension, fluency. However, we are seeing growth right now in K1 and 2. That was shared at a previous curriculum committee meeting in those areas. So we're providing more opportunities, multisensory opportunities, small group learning, and then targeting the instruction around those specific needs of the children. And so we are seeing growth in those areas. But there's a need. The self-regulation, they need to know how to change centers. They need to know how to follow directions. And when they get upset or disappointed, they need to know how to try again. And so that's some of the needs that we're seeing in the early childhood classrooms too.
But I think what I heard from Dr. Henderson is it's not about these individual pieces of data and just presenting out there a bit and piece of improvement in vocabulary or self-regulation. What's the comprehensive profile that we're looking? What are our root causes that identified our need? From the root cause, what's the intervention? Is that intervention having an impact? How are we measuring it? We're going to get there, Dr. Henderson. It's taken a little more time than I had hoped, but I promise you we will have a comprehensive plan that is data-driven with the outcomes and measurement of impact on student learning, as well as teacher practice, and as well as effort. Those are the things we have to work on.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. I appreciate it, and I can definitely understand the sentiment of what the pandemic has created in terms of educational barriers for all of our students. I just think we need to look at a global view of it, right? Multi-decades, right? I'm fifth generation Newburgh. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Burton?
So I think a lot of my questions, not so much my questions, but some of what I was going to say, which is, it's one thing to look at the bigger picture, right? The macro. And so how are we looking at the micro? How are we looking at it on a school by school by school by school? And I've said this before in other committees or whatever. What are those best practices, right? And so, when you talk about, the data, I truly believe you're talking about the data all the time. You're looking at it. That's where the interventions come, the multiple tier, tier of supports and all of that. So, I just go back to, how does that, the system, and then you have these little micro, schools, right? And so do we know what those best practices is? We don't have to have a TSI school to tell us what are those best practices, right? And so what's universal across the board, and then where do we give folks some autonomy? And then what do kids need? And I think I know it's all here. It's all here. It's here. And wait, just in response to the communication director, from my lens, I think that department should be expanded a bit because you have these 12 individual little buildings, not buildings, that are huge, and the communication mechanisms within a school, I can't even imagine what that is. And what does a principal need when that's not what they're trained to do? So what happens in a school times 12, right? We need to expand that department. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Maiden?
Most of what I was thinking has been said, but if we're talking about a budget, it's an investment, and communication is an investment for our community. So why would we even consider not having it? Thank you.
Mr. Howard?
Said, Madam President.
Okay. Mr. Stridiron?
I agree with what Mr. Baer said. During COVID, when it started in 2020, early 2020, the communications strategist was working with the schools, the administration, to get all the information out. I agree that we need a communications strategist, maybe even two, to help the district get out to the information to the parents, to the public, to the media, to work all the information and put it in a way that everyone can understand it. But I only talking about the director of communications. I think we need a communications division, but President Mineo said that we had a lot of these directors with different names in the past, but this is something we didn't have. We had communication strategists, and I agree with that, but I don't agree with the director of communications position itself.
Mr. Stridiron, I'm going to tell you that this is 2022, and it's not 2014. So I think we need to look into the future. And I don't want to be contrary to what you're saying, but I think we all need to advance, and sometimes in advancing, we need to add staff to meet the needs of an advancing technological information society.
And I agree with you. Communication strategists were fine. But as soon as we went to the director of communications, it brought it to a different level. You're taking funds away from the classroom. That you could be putting that towards the classroom. That's all I want.
Thank you. We're going to poll the board, okay? I'm going to start with you again, Ms. Green. We're asking about this one position, whether we want it in or out.
I'm just confused with the director part, but we do need communication. So if it's just communication, I would say yes, because we need someone communication.
help me with that. I don't know what to say here. So you're a no. So you're a no.
We need communication. I would want, okay, let me ask this question. If the director of communication is no longer position.
Put your mic on. Put your mic. It's okay.
If we don't have a director of communication, we still will have a communication department, because I need to be sure about that. Is the director of communication the only person? I mean, is that the only one, or, because we need okay.
Somebody needs to coordinate the efforts of communication, the different levels of communication, the different types of communication. So I believe we need someone to lead that department.
Okay.
I don't think that we could just have individual strategists do that particular work. There needs to be somebody to pull it together. We're talking about long-term planning. We have a huge capital project going on. We have so many things that are happening. We need a director, and that's my vision.
Oh, okay, so then I'm going to be, we can keep that position if you said that,
Thank you.
because I wasn't aware of all that.
Mr. Levinstein.
Keep.
Okay, let's see, Mr. Howard,
Keep.
Mrs. Maida,
Keep.
Mr. Stridarn,
Go.
Mrs. Burton, Dr. Henderson,
No, I think the money could be spent better elsewhere in the classroom.
and I'm going to say keep. How do we fall?
Keep.
Thank you. We're going to move on, I think. Everybody done with 2010? We should have been in an executive session all this time, I guess. We're on Code 2020, Supervision Regular School. Any questions? Or should I just call on Mr. Stridarn? Yeah? You have a question? I know you do.
I don't, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm surprised, because you do make good questions. Good.
Why? Why are you doing this?
I'm sorry, I'm joking. I apologize.
That's
Okay,
uncalled
we're going to
for.
go to Code 2060, Research, Planning, and Evaluation. Any questions? No? We'll move on. We're going to go to 2110, Regular Teaching School Day. Anybody? Code 2250, Teaching Exceptional Learners. Thank you. Code 2280, Occupational Education. Code 2330, Teaching Special Schools. I don't see any hands. Code 2610, School Library and Audiovisuals. Questions? Code 2630, Computer Assisted Instruction. No questions? Code 2805, Attendance Regular School. And I'm struggling with these numbers because I don't have my glasses. Code 2810, Guidance Regular School. Code 2815, Health Services Regular School. Code 2820, Psychological Services Regular School. Yes, sir.
Can you just discuss this code and maybe some of the increases that we're seeing here, and what are some of the supports that we're going to be offering to our students, especially with the, obviously this year and the transition back into school? Yeah, 2820, I believe, yeah.
Mr.
Right?
Bear.
Apologies.
So we've been communicating out to the board that we have listened to the fact that SEL needs to be a priority as we return from the pandemic. And then that's this area, as well as other PPS areas, we have increased staffing to support helping our students adjust back to this sense of normalcy.
Any other questions? Let's move on to 2825, social work services, regular school. No? Okay.
Madam President?
Yes, sir?
Yes, so this line item, does this include any increases in the numbers of social workers?
Mr. Bear?
Didn't hear the question.
Does this line item include any increases in the amount of social workers?
Yes, it does.
How
In
many?
addition to that, we do have positions in the federal grants as well. So this is not all of the monies to support social work support, but it's most.
Okay.
I've previously indicated we have 21, and we're going up additional 2 in the federal, so it'll be 23 altogether,
What's the total number of social workers planned for next year?
including the federal,
Yeah.
23.
23
And as I've
social workers.
communicated when I first got here, we had 7.
Thank you.
So I think that's pretty amazing, so.
Anybody else on that code? We're going to move on to Code 2850, Code Curricular Activities, Regular School Day. Yes, Ms. Burton.
I'd just like some clarification as to why this code and why these very specific activities. Is this like because it's always been this way? How was that decided?
You're asking for how this function code was developed?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
As-
Like why
For as long as I've been
those
here-
activities?
Yeah,
and
for
how
as
did
long
it-
as I've been here, that this is the way it's been, but there are some collapse lines, aren't there, Mr. Goldbeck? Could you expand and see what they are?
I vote too. So
Ms.
for some-
Peterson?
So for some of our extracurricular activities, some of that is built within, some of it is also through booster clubs and other fundraising opportunities, and it's covered over in the overall C&I budget. So it's not just, these are specific district-funded extracurricular activities, and you'll also see that we'll also have separate lines for different things like athletics as well.
Is it just these?
Essentially, yes.
I don't know if that's answering my question. Is it just because it's been historically these particular activities? So if there was a club or another co-curricular activity, how is this decided every single year? Is there an opportunity for something to open up and someone else wants another? I mean, is there a special designation that it's these particular, very specific activities?
So I was just going to I was a former superintendent, and this code here specifically usually is afforded through clubs and fundraising. And so things that the district wants to put monies, taxpayer monies toward, are typically only in this line because you're funding them. Whereas in general, those types of activities that are out there fundraised for. So if the district wants to put monies towards specific clubs and activities, this is the line that they would have to go into.
So an example of that would be the crew club. So the crew club, $15,000 does not support the entire operations of the crew club. There's also fundraising that they have to do on their own. But we had an agreement several years ago to contribute X amount of dollars into crew. So I think it's limited to these specific ones. So is your question, what if someone wanted to add a club to this account? What would the process be? I think you would make that recommendation through our student activities department. There's an application process for that. You complete the application and then we would consider it. But that's the process if you wanted to start a new club within the district. It's funded, it's operated through the finance department.
So is it because these particular co-curricular activities, they have a budget, they fundraise, so if it's a co-curricular activity and they don't incur any expenses, there would be no need for them to ask the district to fund it. So is it So I guess I'm just trying to figure out.
I go back to the response that.
It goes, I know, this has been forever.
Yeah, but
right?
go back
This-
to what Ms. Peterson said. There's also embedded in some of the other categories, the other function codes, alignment to some of these. So for example, debate travel. You've got debate travel in co-curricular, but we have the debate team actual sessions embedded in the curriculum program. So they get their curriculum program through, when I was in charge of C&I, it was through a course, and the kids got credit for it. Is that still the way that operates? It is a course. Okay. So this is just for the travel. This is just for the travel to the teams for the competition.
Mr. Howard and then Mr. Levinstein.
Thank you, Madam President. So, two questions. There is a process if students want to start a club. And to be recognized as a club in the district, you have to go through that process. And then if you go through that process and that process is successful, then you can get a part of this budget for that club. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think these clubs travel. A lot of the other clubs don't travel.
And my second question, so I'm looking at the debate team. I know we used to have a mock trial team. And I think last year, because of the pandemic, they did not operate. So does that money roll over? And how come I don't see them listed as one of the teams, groups here, student groups?
It's a local. It occurs at Orange Ulster BOCES. I don't think that's been a part of this particular piece. I think that's done under another account line.
Okay, because
Mrs. Van?
It usually operates under field trips.
so do we have a mock trial team for this year? Or did they?
We do, and we are actually elaborating that. So we're developing a partnership with county judges, and we're really excited about what we're
Yeah, because the city court judge had approached me about wanting to be participating in that, and I thought that was an excellent opportunity because she was traveling all the way to Mount Vernon, and now she's home.
When you speak, please use your mic. Thank you.
Yeah, Judge Muhammad and
Yes.
Judge Forbes are both teaming to come in and coach our team to do better prepare for
Bring the
trial.
chip home. Bring the chip
Bringing it
home.
home.
There you go.
Yes, we're really excited about the
Mr.
opportunity.
Levinstein.
So I think how we got to this point with this group is, I was on the board in 2010 when the state shut off the funding. They shut off the spigot for funding, and the district eliminated the crew team, they eliminated the debate team. I'm not sure what they did with the solar car. So for those groups to come back, they basically became a club, they private fundraised, and then a couple of years later, when the district was able to get money, they didn't take these groups back into the fold. Like you're asking, what if someone has another club? There's nothing going to be added to this group. So they didn't take them into the fold and say, we're going to pay everything, but we will give you $15,000 to the debate and $15,000 for the crew. And I'm not sure of the solar, if it worked the same way. But these groups were cut from the district, and then they were added back in later after parents and teachers and everyone helped fundraise to bring them back in. That's why they're separate, I believe.
Thank you. Any other questions on that code? We're going to move on to 2855, interscholastic athletics, regular school day. Any questions? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I don't have a question on, it relates to coaching stipends. I'm just wondering where the other Schedule J stipends are, if they're not in there. Is it just in with each subject, or how would that, where are they in the budget if they're not here? I mean, is it in 10 different line items, or?
Well, they would be in contractual expenses in the particular lines if they're not under coaches.
Well, they're definitely, I don't think they'd be listed under coaches, but I'm talking about, club advisors and so they'd be contractual?
I don't believe they're in this line.
I don't know.
Music stipends
The
and...
stipend for the plays, the stipend for the chess club, the stipend for the,
I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
I mean, it's a substantial number in total.
They might be in curriculum, Mr.
So that's a part of, that's under the curriculum and instruction budget.
I think they're spread out.
That's what I'm wondering, if it's spread out. I mean, you got the yearbook stipend and things like that.
Yeah.
So they're just all over the place then. We pull out coaches, because that's a nice slice we can.
We'll give you a
we
definitive.
know exactly what a
We'll
coach
give you a
is.
definitive answer in the weekly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to 5510, District Transportation Services. Questions? Okay, we're going to move on to 5540, Contract Transportation. Yes, Mr. Stradine.
Do we have an approximate number of the reimbursement or the credit that the district has received this year for buses that didn't run in the contract?
Mr. Forger, who would you direct this to?
Yeah, that would be Mr. Goldeck, and I believe we'll get you that information.
We get credit from our, if we have buses laid up over the summer, we get credit from like the first area. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Put your mic on.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we've had buses pretty much every day since September that haven't been showing up at the schools. The parents have been getting calls about an hour before the end of school saying, either come pick up your kid or your kid will come home maybe at 6:30 at night. So does the district get a credit for that? Because if the bus run doesn't go, then the district shouldn't have to pay for that.
right.
Do we have a running total of that? Because if we're paying the bus company, that's going to be a problem.
I need to get verification for that, but I know in many of the circumstances, it may not be that original run. It will be a different run where those students are picked up. So the student is actually being given the opportunity for transport if the parent doesn't pick them up. But there are certain circumstances where the bus just isn't able to get there. Let me get you that information and we'll provide it for you.
Can that be public, please?
Sure,
Thank you.
absolutely. We can do that on the 19th.
Mr. Howard.
So, Madam President, so what would be a reason why a bus couldn't make a run to pick up our kids?
Driver shortage?
And they will let us know that day?
They may let us know at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There were a lot of complicating circumstances that occurred this year with COVID.
So is that regularly happening?
It's greatly improved.
So then we definitely should have some reimbursable money in
We're
regards
going
to
to
that. That's
research
ridiculous.
that. We're going to share it in the weekly, and we'll share it at the April 19th meeting.
Because I've been hearing some horror stories from some parents, having calls that their children that they have to come pick up their kids. What about people that don't have transportation to pick up their child? Then what happens?
They have to wait.
They wait for the next bus.
So we let
which is-
another bus go get them. Wow.
It's not good. Any other questions on this? Dr. Henderson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Just with everything going on in terms of the price of oil and gas and the volatility, is this an area of the budget that we're preparing to have a little bit more wiggle room in, just in case we really see a large increase in this number, especially next year? Thank you.
I actually met with Ms. Coyne over that, and one of the things that she did was an analysis of fuel costs, and did her best. It's hard to predict the future, but she did put in a significant increase based on what she came up with. But we don't know where this is going for sure, But I think she did a good job with it. I think the numbers will most likely work where she has them.
Yeah, I just think this is an area that might behoove us to make sure that we have allotted funds. It might behoove us to make sure that we have allotted funds to cover the cost of the increases. Thank you.
Ms. Peterson?
Just so you're aware, Dr. Henderson, in the budget analysis for transportation, Mrs. Coyne did a complete analysis of expenses for transportation because we knew and she anticipated that there were going to be these increases. We also did put a set aside in ARP for that additional funding, just to ensure that we have enough to cover these type of expenses.
Mr. Strayer?
When you have a bus company call a parent and say that there is going to be no bus to either bring them to school or bring them home, well, mostly bring them to school, would that be a denial of educational services?
I defer to Mr. Shaw.
Yeah.
If the situation is such that there's no way that the child can get to school, yes, that would be tantamount to a denial.
So that's a civil rights violation by the bus companies? Because it's happening to special ed students as well. So if a special ed student can't get to school, they can't get their therapies, they can't get their education.
So there are bus routes that aren't happening in the morning also?
Yes. So what does the district do anything about it?
Do you want advice in executive session about that? Probably the place for it.
Well, I think it would be good for the board to understand that it's happening. I mean, I don't think the board knows that it's happening.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine to identify a problem. To talk about contingent liabilities in a concrete way, this isn't the place for that.
Thank you. I would like to.
Mr. Howard?
No, I agree. I was going to say that's definitely something we should discuss in executive session because we need to determine if the bus company is doing that, where's that lawsuit directed? Because people shoot against the wall. They shoot against everybody and see what sticks. I don't know if we're going to be something that's going to be outside of that or inside of that. So we definitely need to talk about that.
Thank you. We're going to go on to employee benefits. Questions? And we'll go to the last code, 9901, interfund transfers. Questions? Yes, sir.
Does the second item, transfer to debt service, is that use of the fund to pay for some of the budget, or is that something different?
Mr. Goldbeck?
No, it moves over to the debt service account and pays for some of our debt service.
So this is just, we're just putting in less money this year than last year to fund the debt? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions on those items? Thank you. I think that concludes the item by item.
Madam President,
Yes, sir.
so are we going to executive session to have that conversation or are we going to do it after the meeting?
We can do that after. Let's do it in the second exec. We'll do a
Okay.
second exec quickly. Okay. So are you done?
Madam President, thank you for the opportunity to go through the budget. We are anxiously awaiting the state budget, and once we receive those numbers, we will be prepared on April 19th to bring the final budget for adoption. Are there any other questions from the board with regards to that?
So if the state doesn't have a final budget by April 19th, which has happened before, we're still going to go ahead with a budget, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You done? Yes.
That concludes my item, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. We're going to go to our board committees, and the only one we have is Audit and Finance Committee, Mr. Levinstein.
Thank you, Madam President. So the Audit and Finance met at 5 p.m. tonight. We discussed the 14 resolutions on tonight's finance consent agenda, and we also had discussions on future resolutions concerning budgets of the library, food services, and the general fund budget. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on. I'm going to talk for a moment about the Superintendent Search. The board is going to meet and do interviews on the last Saturday from 8 in the morning until maybe 4:30 in the afternoon in April, and the first Saturday in May. And we should be hearing from our consultant soon, giving us a number of total number of applicants, and then they winnow it down to about 4 to 6 for us to look at. So I'm going to move on with my item 5.2, which is a resolution to adopt policy on the first read, 4531, field trips and other trips. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved. Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein? Yes. Ms. Maida?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Exceptional Learners, Mr. Bayer.
Thank you, Madam President. The Exceptional Learner Division has one item for the board's consideration tonight. It's the recommendations from the Csc and Cpsc Committees.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard? Yes. Mr. Levinstein? Yes. Ms. Maida?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron? Yes. Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Mr. Baer. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Mr. Goldbeck.
Thank you, Madam President. Tonight we have items 7.1 through 7.14 as consent items.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maida?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Goldbeck. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McLemore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the Human Resources agenda, I have items 8.1 through 8.10 for your consideration on tonight.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Mr. Levinstein?
Thank you, Madam President. So looking over this chart, and this kind of relates to, I think, what Mr. Forger maybe was implying to Mr. Stridiron. We have a salary here for people that were appointed. A sub-teacher aide, $13.35 an hour. We have a sub-teaching assistant, $13.35 an hour. We have daily teacher subs, non-certified, I'm assuming it's a 7-hour day, $15.14 an hour. And certified teachers, $16.57 an hour. So if you're looking for why principals or teachers are saying they can't find subs, there's no subs, that people won't come here, I don't know what the district expects when their offer is less than what some McDonald's pay for professional jobs that we want. And I think that needs to be addressed somehow if you want to go forward in getting qualified employees, sub and full-time. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion on any human resources items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Maida? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. We're going to move on to the Clerk of the Board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the approval of the minutes from March 22nd, 2022.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So, second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maida?
Yes.
If you're still interested in running for the board, packets of information are available. The current seats are held by Dr. Henderson, Ms. Maida, and Mr. Stridiron. You need to get 100 qualified voters of the district, and those petitions need to be turned into the office of the district clerk by 5 p.m. on April 27th. That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We're now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Please refer to the procedure sheet. Would anybody like to address the board on non-agenda items? Okay, thank you. We got to go to executive session. We're not done yet, though. Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose, and that is to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Stridiron? Yes. Ms. Burton? Yes. Ms. Green?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Mr. Levenstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maida? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes. We will not be doing business when we return. Thank you.